Okay. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Ramesh Ratnazar, and I'm very pleased to welcome Governor Asa Hutchinson, who's joining us today to talk about the initiative he's launching as the chairman of the National Governors Association to promote the expansion of computer science education in schools across the country. Governor Hutchinson has had a distinguished career in public service as a U.S. attorney, member of Congress, the director of the Drug Enforcement Administration, and undersecretary in the Department of Homeland Security. And he's now in his second term as governor of the great state of Arkansas. And Governor, I wanted to just ask you before we get into the work that you've done in Arkansas and the way in which Arkansas has become a model for computer science education. I just wanted to ask you sort of where your commitment and interest in this issue came from. What was the spark that made you decide you really wanted to prioritize this for your state?
Well, there's two parts to it. First of all, post 9/11, I was undersecretary at Homeland Security in the Bush administration, and I actually had responsibility overseeing the agencies that were designed to prevent a terrorist attack on our soil. Well, you had to do that through technology. It was the data analytics, it was the software that took massive amounts of information, tried to determine what puts us at risk, what is safe commerce, and target those for inspection, whether it's a container or whether it's individuals or passengers on a plane. And so it was that experience with the importance of technology for security that brought me to run for governor. And then it was my granddaughter. That was the other part of the story. Ella Beth, who was 11 years old at the time, built me with her dad an app so that you can volunteer for the campaign. You could donate to the campaign. I said, if my 11-year-old granddaughter can do this, this is something that's really important for all of Arkansas. You can learn at a very young age. And so that's what started the initiative. That's what motivated me, and it's taken off since then.
So when you first introduced this idea of requiring every public and charter high school in Arkansas to offer computer science, what sort of resistance, if any, did you encounter?
Well, first of all, there was a lot of the rolling of the eyes. You're going to run for governor talking about computer coding. And then as it gained momentum, though, it really, the public understood it, parents understood it in terms of the importance. But once we passed the law that required it to be offered in every high school, you had to overcome some resistance from educators, from superintendents, the establishment, and then you had to sell it to many students in rural areas, particularly that, you know, their dad works in the factory or the farm, and they just could not visualize a future in which they were involved with technology. And so we had to sell it because even though we required it to be offered in the schools, you didn't require the students to take it. That's why I went to over 80 high schools marketing computer science to the students. And once the demand started increasing, the students understood it. Teachers embraced it very quickly because the students are always first. They wanted to be able to satisfy their needs and provide the courses that they wanted. So it strengthened, but there was some challenges at the beginning.
And so you mentioned teachers, and that seems to me, one of the big issues that schools face, across the board. I mean, how do you find qualified teachers? How do you train them to do the work? And I imagine you didn't have a large workforce of teachers who could step in and start teaching computer science. What did you do to build the capabilities of the existing workforce? Did you have to go outside and recruit new teachers? What sort of steps were taken to kind of address that challenge?
Well, all of the above, but very importantly, whenever we started, we had fewer than 20 certified teachers across the state of Arkansas in computer science. Now we have close to 600. And so whenever we started, it was providing the professional development, it was recruiting the teachers and giving them confidence that even though they didn't have the background in technology, that they could learn it so that they could guide the students and prepare them. Because so much of this is self-learned, you've got to have facilitators, and you have to have confidence that the teachers for themselves that they can do it. And then we incentivize them, and that was very important. Our legislature gave $5 million every 2 years for the Computer Science Initiative. We used a portion of that to provide $10,000 for teachers over 5 years that became certified in computer science and taught it in the classroom. So that was $2,000 a year as an extra bonus for teaching it. All of that combined helped us to recruit and retain critical teachers. We still need to do more. We've got to recruit more teachers, particularly now that we've taken it to the next level of requiring it as a graduation credit. We're going to put more money into it, and we're going to work that to incentivize the teachers to be a part of this important initiative.
I imagine that you have just a wide range of schools in Arkansas and just a wide range of capabilities and infrastructure in the schools throughout the state. How do you ensure that, students in a lower income or rural school where, they might have very few computers, might not have reliable broadband access, how do you ensure that they're getting the same quality of education that the kids in the more affluent parts of the state are receiving? I mean, computer science obviously requires some infrastructure that, not all schools are going to have.
You're absolutely right. And equity in education has been a challenge in every sphere of education. And computer science, perhaps the gap was wider, but in some ways it's also almost easier to close that gap with a concentrated effort. And so you mentioned access in the schools. The first thing we did was to provide to every school access to high-speed broadband. And then, of course, there's still the gap because the students go to their home in a rural area and they won't have the capability in the home for high-speed broadband in contrast to the urban areas. And this was magnified as a problem during COVID when we depended upon, in some instances, virtual education. So there is that gap. And so we're investing hundreds of millions of dollars right now to expand the broadband into the rural communities, into their homes, so that gap is not there. And then, of course, it's harder to recruit the teachers in the rural areas. And so we've had to devote special funds for our rural areas to bring them up, to make sure they have what they need to recruit and retain the teachers. It's still a challenge, but we're trying to overcome it with those initiatives. But what COVID did was it taught everybody that you literally can run the world from your hometown in rural Arkansas when you have access to high-speed broadband and coding, because people work remotely. And that was illustrated during the pandemic. And so everyone understood it in rural areas and urban areas, and they could visualize themselves working for a company in Houston or San Jose or Charlotte or globally and live in a rural area, because that's what the pandemic taught us again. And so it both showed the challenge, gave us some tools to overcome that as well.
No, that's interesting. I wanted to ask you about kind of the economic impact of this expansion of computer science education in Arkansas. So I think you've had about a tenfold increase in the number of students who now have taken computer science during their time in high school. What has that impact been economically? Are those students now finding opportunities in Arkansas or tech jobs coming to Arkansas as a result of people knowing that there's a pool of people who have these skills?
They are. That's absolutely true. First of all, Arkansas, even though we're a rural state in many ways, agriculture remains very important to us. But we do have the international home of Walmart, their global campus here. We have Tyson's Foods. We have trucking companies that are engaged in logistics. And so all of those older established companies are now technology companies, and it helps us to keep them here versus moving their online business to out of state. And then secondly, my goal has been to create Arkansas as a micro hub of technology companies, and we're having some success there. We've had technology companies that started here, that have expanded here. We've had technology companies that have moved in from the West Coast to Arkansas, and a part of that is because we have a talent pool and the pathway for them to know that they can have the workforce that they needed. So it's really exceeded my expectations in terms of the economic benefit. We've also had higher education that has responded by increasing their course offerings, the quality of their courses. So, and I don't want to oversell. We have a long ways to go. We have much more to do, but again, the foundation is solid as a rock, and it's increasing in terms of the quality of courses and the number of students.
So as you try to kind of build this out nationally and try to gain momentum for computer science education nationally, obviously what you've done in Arkansas is a model for other states. I imagine you're still going to face some questions about how to do this and how to implement it. And one question that you kind of alluded to it earlier is that public schools have to do so many things. There are a lot of schools that are just struggling to keep the lights on, keep kids enrolled, trying to just make sure kids are the basic necessities, basic skills, proficiency in subjects. And I imagine there are going to be some people who will say, this is a luxury. I mean, computer science sounds great, but we've got much more important first order needs we've got to deal with. How would you respond to that? How should schools and educators, policymakers prioritize computer science, with everything else that they have to deal with?
They have to understand, and our nation has to understand, that this is a national security issue. It's computer science really breaks down to cybersecurity, which we all know is a national security issue. It is about the future in terms of blockchain. It is about data analytics. So all of those aspects of computer science is really a national security issue. And it boils down to every industry globally needs more software engineers, need more data analytics. And where are they going to get those resources? And for America, we're either going to produce the talent right here, or we're not going to keep up in a technology sense, or we're going to import all of our talent. And the only option that's acceptable to me and from a national security standpoint is that we create that talent right here. So you start with educators understanding the national security aspect of it. And then secondly, the students are going to continue to showcase the demand, and educators respond to that. So I think educators will prioritize it whenever they understand the necessity of it for the students. It's not just an extra course, it is a core course, and that's why we now have required it as a graduation credit. The challenge nationally is to make sure everybody understands how it can really fit in well. You incorporate computer science education into all of your curriculum, and then the students can take it as a math or a science credit, so you're not overburdening the system. The greatest challenge, again, is simply recruiting the teacher talent, retaining them, and you're off and running.
So you mentioned that Arkansas is one of the 3 states, I think, that now is requiring computer science. So every student, in order to get their diploma, will need to have taken 1 computer science class. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct.
So, is that ultimately what it's going to take? I mean, is in your mind kind of you envision that that's what is going to be required to really kind of make allow the country to realize the full benefits of computer science for all?
I absolutely do, and that's one of the goals that I have in my chairman's initiative, is to increase the number of states from 3 upward as to requiring it for graduation. And I think we can be successful. For Arkansas, we started out with the path of offering it in every school, and then we gradually increased. But you see, in switching it to a mandatory requirement, but it is foundational. And we don't want to diminish arts education. We don't want to diminish history, math, and the other sciences. All of these are incredibly important for us. But in every field you go into, whether it's agriculture and utilizing GPS in your farming operations and software in the medical field, every field you go into, you are a more attractive talent in the workforce when you have that background in computer science. And so everybody, whatever they're interested in, if it's music, fits very well into electronic music and the software that helps develop that, game design, videos. Students understand it fundamentally, but in every sphere, it has to be a basic, and it should be required for graduation.
How are you hoping to engage with businesses and technology companies in particular in promoting this initiative and developing the kind of curriculum that students are going to need going forward?
Well, and that's a challenge, just because business is very busy. They have a full agenda on their plate already, and then we want to ask them to be involved in creating a better education system. But it's in their best interest. It's in the interest of their business plan if they can get that talent pool coming their direction. And so they understand that and they advocate for it, but to get them connected to the school is a greater challenge. So that's one aspect we want to do better in. The apprenticeships are important, but it is whenever somebody from industry comes in and talks to a class about technology, all of a sudden the students see it in a reality form versus theory from the teacher. And so that's what's needed. Secondly, it is the advocacy part of it with the legislature. The most important part of one of the important parts of what we did in Arkansas is we put money behind it. When you put money behind it, there's a seriousness of the effort, but it also gives you money for competitions among the students so that they can showcase their skills and get cash awards where the teachers can be incentivized and rewarded. This is the benefit of putting the money behind it. And so industry can help advocate in those areas. And we have to advocate nationally as we want to move this to a national platform. It's not a federal government mandate coming down. That doesn't work. Education is always the role of the states and innovation and leading, but industry can really help shape that. And the advocacy part is something I'm asking them to do.
Well, maybe if I could just ask as a last question, I think it sort of picks up on what you just said. It does seem that there's a lot of strife right now, as you know, politically, and that's now sort of trickling into schools to some extent. Maybe that's always been true. But how do we sort of recenter the conversation away from some of these sort of political or social issues and toward, the more fundamental question of what students need, the skills they need to be prepared to compete going forward? I mean, are you concerned about the way in which we are approaching education, and how do you think we can sort of make computer science and STEM education in general a bigger priority nationally?
Well, that's an excellent question, and that's a challenge for our nation that, we have local candidates, state candidates, all running on national issues, and they're not talking about the bread and butter issues of education and crime and what we need to do, for safe streets. And so we need to get back to the basics of education and economic development. And that's the role of leaders such as myself. We do have a lot of divide. This is not one that divides, though. Computer science, technology, education actually brings people together whenever you can overcome equity issues. But one of the greatest areas of growth in our computer science has been among girls taking coding. The minorities have increased. There's still a gap there, but when they understand that software will help develop the future, both culturally and in every other way, and if we don't have a diverse population involved in creating that future through technology, then we're going to have gaps, and it's not going to be a complete future, and it's not going to be the America we want. So I'm hopeful that even through technology, we can be more together in terms of our purposes, and even as a society, in reducing those equity differences.
Well, Governor, I want to thank you for joining us, for taking the time, and I want to wish you the best of luck with this initiative.
Thank you for the opportunity to showcase this, and